I'm sitting in one of the most affordable SUVs or CUVs in the BMW lineup, the X1. And this was more purpose-built for the European and Asian markets. So does it work for the North Americans or the United States specifically? So the good is, this interior reminds me of more what they were doing in the mid-2000s. For example, when my right hand is on the steering wheel where it belongs, it's only about 5 inches of space to adjust the volume knob and the HVAC controls for the driver because the center stack is tilted more towards you. And there's a lot of thought to ergonomics in this car. I don't feel as inundated as I am with the more higher end products. The gauge cluster uses electroluminescence and less screens there. You have the last generation iDrive setup, which requires far less menu jumping, and the screen is smaller. And you know, if you're looking at this for around $35,000 to $38,000, I can see why it makes a lot of sense. Now into the lower storage area, you still have the digi-stick. The cup holders are very basic. It's very BMW. If you've ever seen a BMW interior, everything else here is mostly the same. Now the negatives in the front cargo area or front passenger areas, well, it definitely feels more narrow. And I think a lot of this has to do with the lower seating design and upper seating design. I am a smaller guy. I've always been a smaller guy in every single area of my body, specifically my hips and my legs and my pelvis. And these seats, my legs are resting on the bolsters. That's how inward they are. So if you're bigger, and I'm not even talking bigger, if you're average size, this is going to be a definite problem for you. And if you're over like 220 pounds or over like 6'2", you're gonna want to cut these seats out and put like a stool in here to sit instead. So that to me really is the biggest negative, aside from, you know, there's more plastics in here, you know, there's less luxury style features. This specific tester is almost like $45,000 or $50,000 and it still has the base audio system. Little things like that. This is not a value car or a value vehicle, even though this is the lowest or the lowest on the totem pole for a BMW. But let's check out the back seats. In the back seats, you'll see all this white stuff blowing around here, and that's not my dandruff that is coming off me, that is snow. And at the end of April, you would think that it'd be warmer, but it's not. But at least I'm relatively comfortable in the back of the X1. This makes up for some of the problems in the front seat. So if there was a way to drive this and drive the car from the back seats, I think you'd be way more comfortable. But in terms of seating configuration on the back, there's multiple ways to fold down the back seats, and that's where this becomes more usable. The back seat space is great. The cargo space in the back is way more than what you would expect if you just sat in the front seats. If you sat in the front, you'd be like, oh, this is just some like compact CUV. It's not. The back and the cargo area is what sells you on this. If you have to have it as like a people mover or a cargo mover, I think you're gonna be really impressed with that. But let's head into the shop and talk turkey about some of the mechanical aspects of this. The BMW X1. Underneath, you're gonna see something special here. It's front-wheel drive. That's right. Typically, when we look at BMWs, they're all rear-wheel drive architectures, but not here. This is shared with the Mini Countryman, down to the transmission, the engine, and this adds a Haldex all-wheel drive setup. Now, this is a diversion for BMW because the previous X1 used to be rear-wheel drive. Now they've moved to this. And based on what the engineers were trying to do, they wanted to give the vehicle, making these changes, freed up space in the rear end. You didn't have the size of the drive shaft, the rear suspension, and the rear differential. So that allowed them more packaging space to give you more cargo capacity in the back and more occupant capacity in the two back seats. And that's one of the biggest things you notice. And this is what we talk about in compromise in engineering. That's why they've done this. Now, it is a little bit longer than the Countryman, and you can see where the radiator support bracket is in the front and this huge front grille or frontal area that this has. But when you get to the underneath, really, there's still the BMW quality that you traditionally see on like the X3 and the X5. Yes, there's a lot of stamped steel, but you see all the NVH coverings, the sound deadening material, and the wheel liners all the way back, and they even have aerodynamic touches. You have wind guiders or wind deflectors on the rear control arms, and the muffler is flat in the back to avoid wind turbulence. And and that's why this still maintains a lot of the feeling of traditional BMWs, which we're going to talk about now on the drive. Let's take a look.
Feel that mighty 4-cylinder, Mark.
I'm feeling real sporty right now with, what is it, a 2-liter?
2-liter BMW motor shared with the Mini Cooper.
I'm liking it.
Oh yeah, it's real impressive.
Okay, so tell me about it.
Before I get into the review itself, I'm going to be all highbrow for a minute, Mark. I'm going to bring up 2 philosophical questions about this car. The first being, this is a front-wheel drive BMW, well, front-wheel drive bias BMW, and with the new 2 Series Grand Coupe coming out, which is also another front-wheel drive BMW, what does that really mean for the brand as a whole? That's my first question for you. And second, cars are more and more about value, right? I mean, it's something we bring up all the time. What do you get for your money? And in a segment that doesn't offer a lot of value, meaning premium, sub-luxury, compact SUVs, what are you getting for your money?
I don't know. In this car, I mean, to me, I'll be completely honest, I haven't driven this. I didn't drive it once. I got in it and pulled it in the garage. I looked at the interior. I kind of just looked at the overall what it is. And to me, if you're getting this for like $38,000, which is basically
base, no options.
Base, no options. Some of it makes sense, but
I think the BMW thing, to bring that up first, I think because they're going less enthusiast now, clearly with some of their cheaper models, they've ditched the rear-wheel drive architecture in favor for interior refinement, space, comfort. I think it's probably a shift in the brand that you'll see moving forward as they try to grab more people, have a more mainstream appeal. I don't know what that'll mean for the cars as a whole, but it worries me. I think from a luxury proposition, this is in line with all the other competitors, like the Q3, the GLA, in some ways the Jaguar E-Type SUV. So I don't think it's a standout in any way, but it does everything reasonably well.
The one thing that impresses me about this and the BMW lineup as a whole is there's a complete connectedness and cohesion on what they are trying to be. You get out of this, an X3, an X5, they all have the same feeling, and granted this is front-wheel drive, but it still has the same suspension tuning, the same overall feel and look to it, and it's cohesive again. Really, it's cohesive against every single model they make. And I think to the untrained eye and to somebody that is driving this, it feels very BMW. Granted, this is the least BMW of any product they have, at least in the US.
Its suspension tuning, like the X5, the 3 Series, and the 5 Series, gives up some plushness for body control. That's a pretty typical BMW trait.
Yeah.
And the motor, sure, it's still a 4-cylinder turbocharged unit. It's still fairly refined. Here, I'll floor it for you. The drivetrain's totally adequate. It's reasonably quick, particularly for this segment in the mid-6s to 60. There's a lot of torque. It's pretty smooth. You can definitely tell it's a 4-cylinder. You're never going to mistake it for one of the inline 6s BMW makes, but it's, like everything else about this car, competitive in its segment and exactly what you're expecting.
So the way that I think about it, just listening to it and feeling it, one, for this, it's too firm for me, and BMW does this on all theirs, so that's nothing new. It's too firm for what this is, at least in America. The second thing is, I like what they did with the transmission here. It's a different gearbox compared to what they typically use, like you said, with the ZF. The Aisin unit feels as good as an Aisin unit feels in any car. The engine tuning, the smoothness of the 4-cylinder and the turbo, there's not any weird power delivery. It revs out cleanly all the way to the red line. So again, this is a broken record with BMW. The way the people who handle the drivetrain division, they are some of the most adept in the industry at providing the best performance, the best feeling drivetrain and transmission combination. And just based on your driving, most people are never going to be able to tell it's not rear-wheel drive based on how you're going to drive this.
Yeah, no, it's clearly not a car designed for the U.S. market. From the interior to the exterior, most Americans, clearly based on the sales numbers, either going to get the X3 or the X5. But if you are looking for a small, and I mean this thing is very small.
Up front, for sure.
Yeah, SUV with a lot of interior space, I mean, it's not going to set your world on fire, but it's acceptable.
Let's get into the final thoughts, and I'll talk about some of the pros and cons about this. All right. Wow, would you look at that? Final thoughts on the BMW X1. And yes, there wasn't a high amount of enthusiasm for this vehicle. And I'm going to get into kind of the why. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. The drivetrain engineers for BMW are masters. The engine is smooth, the transmission is really good, the way that the transmission's programmed, there is nothing that sets up any red flags. The choice of using a Haldex all-wheel drive setup versus just an on-demand system gives you the feeling that it doesn't want to plow. It's very neutral all the time when you drive it. So pretty much the fundamentals are there. It's pretty quiet. It's mostly comfortable, specifically in the back seats, and all the technology works pretty well. But what this is it reminds me of just a corporate lease vehicle. And I know they only sell about 20 to 30,000 of these in the US, and they don't sell a lot, so this is not a high volume product. But being in it, after I started driving, I felt like I was back in corporate America. Like I literally just got out of work. I followed my Outlook calendar and my spreadsheets all day long. I watched the clock for hours to wait until 5. I got on this thing, and I felt like I was in another XYZ machine. I felt an absolute sense of death inside, just being inside it. And it inspires nothing, like absolutely nothing. And I think part of that is by design. They want this to have that very, very clean feel to it. And then you drive it and you just realize you're not getting a lot out of it. And I think there's so many other products in the US specifically in this price range in the SUV world that do a lot more, at least in character, personality, drivability, sound system. They do things better for less money, let's be honest. BMW, even in the X1, despite its low entry level price, this is still not a value product. They nickel and dime you for things they shouldn't. Something that the lower level competitors don't do anymore. Like the base audio system is not something you would even want to associate with a luxury product. You have to go up to a $900 Harman Kardon audio system to get marginally better audio. The fact that this doesn't have things like heated and cooled seats, just standard. And granted, the technology works pretty well and some of the things work really well, but there's just too much left off the table. It's not really that competitive. And when you look at something like an Acura RDX, let's remove reliability and all this stuff, the RDX is like everything that this vehicle's not for a similar price. And that's what competition does. I just feel like this vehicle exists just the fact that they needed to fill the X lineup with more numbers, X1 through X100. And, drive it, clearly, it's still good. And if you're somebody that just needs a very level-headed approach, a very zen approach, that's what you're going to get driving this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.